Wonderful. Yes, yes. Welcome. Good Monday, good people. I am Johnny Caldwell, one half of the Cocktail Bandits, the ladies talk cocktails daily. And today I am operating as a board member for our local USBG. Hope you're a member. So today we are on site for our first event for our USBG Education Week. And we're starting off with a little bit of coffee education and tasting. The good folks over at Counterculture Coffee are hosting us this afternoon, for a coffee cupping. Dustin.
Hello,
Hey.
My name is Dustin Matson. I work as an educator as well as a regional technician in the Charleston area and as well as Atlanta. So I am all over the place. But yeah, I've been working for Counterculture since about 2015 and I haven't been in coffee since about, 2006. So I've been working in coffee for many moons now. And yeah, I got like a little tasting setup of some interesting coffees from a few different places that we'll be able to kind of taste together, yeah?
Awesomeness, you guys. We are at 85.5 Spring Street. That is where Counterculture Coffee is located. And you guys are open for business now, right? Kinda?
Yeah. Normally this space is kind of used for a lot of barista training, a lot of educational type stuff about coffee. We do a lot of teaching of coffee people, whether they're working in a cafe space or in a restaurant, and we have in the past have been pretty active in doing like public events as well, which is kind of on a little bit of a pause. So we're still waiting until that's a little bit safer to do. But at some point, yes, we will have weekly public coffee events as well. Yeah, so mostly what I'm doing in this space at the moment is teaching and training baristas and people that are making coffee for a living in order to be better at their job.
That's right. This is a great time to be educated and get some additional training if before you didn't have a chance to. That's why we're recording this now so you guys can watch it and learn more from Dustin. I've already learned so much just from talking to him while we're getting prepped up. And I want to tell you, it smells amazing inside this space. You can just smell all the different aromas. Before we get into our first tasting, cupping, if you will, I do want to let you guys know that there are more events this week for USBG Education Week. Tomorrow, there is a yoga and amaro class at High Wire Distillery. That starts at 11 a.m. On Wednesday, they're meeting at Patois. At 2 p.m., there's going to be a rum tasting and education, also some lunch involved with that. On Thursday, there's going to be a community service event at Fresh Future Farms in the morning. So we're going to go out and help the farm get all those weeds and stuff out of the garden. And then afterwards, that group is going to meet at Door Brothers at 12 for lunch and some more education. So we have a fun-filled educational week planned out. So hopefully you guys can come out to those events. And if not, you'll be able to tune in via the live. So now, Dustin, I'm ready for some coffee. I've waited patiently before we were getting prepped not to have any coffee so my taste buds could be nice and ready.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
And these coffees have actually been brewed for a little bit of time, which is actually good because we typically, when we're doing a formal coffee cupping, we're trying to actually intentionally let the coffees cool off, which probably sounds a little bit strange since most of the time you get coffee either like piping hot or ice cold, especially in the summertime. But we actually want to have the things almost as close to our own body temperature as possible because you actually perceive flavors better that way.
Such a good point. I've never thought of that. I always want my coffee as hot as I can possibly stand it when I'm enjoying it.
Which is good for enjoying it, just as like a beverage. But when we're kind of formally tasting things, we kind of want to be able to give our taste buds the chance to kind of like see what's going on without just something about things being hot or cold. Your brain almost wants to be more like defensive and just be like, ouch, hot, or wow, that's really cold. And it's kind of a little bit trickier to perceive flavors. So kind of talking about this very first coffee, it is from a place in Ethiopia called Sharbo Maro. And I chose this one first because Ethiopia is what we consider to be the birthplace of coffee, specifically the species of coffee called coffee arabica. You may have seen like coffee arabica on specific packaging for coffee, maybe on the grocery store shelf, but coffee arabica is almost exclusively the species that you would see in sort of like the specialty coffee realm. But coffee Arabica is really only indigenous to one sort of area of the world, and that place being Ethiopia.
Wow.
So that's kind of most of our earliest known records of coffee even being consumed in any form, even if it was just like people picking the fruit off of the shrub and just like eating it just like fruit, or using the leaves in some form or fashion.
How early are we talking when we're talking about like early? BC?
Like more like kind of ancient times, yeah.
Oh, wow.
And then like, you know, maybe 1500s, maybe 1600s, maybe first starting to experience it as like a roasted product of some sort. And a lot of like Sufi Muslim culture had a big influence on coffee being like roasted for the first time.
Okay.
And then sort of coffee sort of eventually got sort of wrapped up in like the spice trades of like moving a lot of like, you know, exotic like spices sort of around the world. And then,
Like teas or indigos, not indigos,
yeah,
but
yeah, and it was very much localized to the Middle Eastern area. So like, you know, Ethiopia, Yemen kind of became like the first like known coffee producer like outside of Ethiopia as far as like it being grown for like commercial production. But yeah, so a lot of coffee in Ethiopia really only tastes like coffee from Ethiopia, and the main reason is because the biodiversity that's there. There is literally hundreds of thousands of like different varieties that are known and even like not known in Ethiopia that are being grown. So whereas once we started moving coffee out of Ethiopia, a lot of that stuff just really got very straight and narrow, and like a lot of that biodiversity was lost. So almost think about if say for like apples, say like maybe you went to the grocery store and you literally had like Red Delicious, Green, or like Granny Smith, like Yellow Delicious, like Crips Pink, Fuji, Jazz, like Honey Crisp, and you had like all the apples to choose from, and then you went to the next grocery store and you only had like one type to choose from. That's kind of like sort of like kind of what's in a very crude form sort of what's happening in Ethiopia versus pretty much anywhere else. Most coffee producers in Ethiopia are producing many different varieties of the plant sort of at the same time. So we just taste things in coffee from Ethiopia that we just don't taste anywhere else. So would you like to taste it?
yes.
Cool. So kind of how we go about tasting coffee in a formal coffee cupping is that you'll have one of these very wide bouillon spoons, or soup spoon, or cupping spoon if you're in the coffee world.
Yes.
And what you want to do is you just want to kind of give your spoon a little rinse just to make sure it's nice and clean, especially in between passes into the bowl, just for keeping things nice and sanitary. But you'll just kind of take a little bit of coffee, kind of put it in the spoon like this, and it's nice to give it a very annoying slurp, like that. Kind of similar to what you would see happen in maybe sort of some wine tasting or something, right?
Yeah.
Giving the big heavy slurp. And what that does is it gets your sense of smell involved.
Mm-hmm.
Like your olfactories are actually what's giving you sort of all the information of what something tastes like, right?
Mm-hmm.
Your taste buds are only looking for like sweet, sour, salty, bitter. So you need kind of your sense of smell to kind of give yourself kind of the full picture of what's going on.
That's a good way to describe it. We talk about it when we are drinking spirits to blow it out to release the ethanol that's in the alcohol, but it's the same concept
Yeah.
of bringing that air into it so that you can get your nasal passages involved.
Kind of like retrohaling maybe.
Yes.
Yeah. So kind of what we have marked on the packaging for this coffee is sort of like 3 flavor notes.
Mm-hmm.
And it says sweet melon, orange, and floral. Citrus and floral notes specifically are something that you find commonly in coffees from Ethiopia, particularly from the Yirgacheffe region, but this one actually isn't from Yirgacheffe, but we still get, because of the varieties used, a lot of like floral type flavors. And this one has kind of, to me, more of like maybe like an orangey, kind of like almost like an orange blossom kind of thing, whereas like some coffees from Ethiopia might be more like jasmine-y, have like a really like super tea-like kind of like floral character to them. This one feels more like a orange blossom type vibe for some reason.
I get that.
A thing that you use in cocktails, right? Orange blossom water. Yeah, so, and then to counter, to pair with that one, this is a coffee also from Ethiopia, but this one is what we would call a natural sun-dried coffee, or a naturally processed coffee. And it is a coffee called Okolu.
Before we move on, let's see, does anybody else want to try this coffee? Because I think as you go forward, there are going to be different levels of this coffee thing. This is a good baseline. Those guys.
Yeah. Rinse water.
We don't want to leave anybody out. Get all the flavors going on. Get in there, cocktail bandit. Don't be shy. Don't mind the slurp. There we go. So you know it's real. Slurping it in.
What do you think?
I love the way it tastes.
Yeah?
Definitely getting the orange blossom.
Yeah.
And just like when we do our cocktail tastings, we're not, this coffee is not sweetened.
No.
It has not been given any creamer or any type of artificial flavoring. So you're really able to taste all the layers of flavor, all the different nuances going on inside there. And that's the best way.
For sure.
That's delicious.
Yeah. And granted, like, sometimes coffee people, and a lot of times, like, there's conversations in our space where it's like, well, if you're not drinking your coffee black or without cream and sugar, then, like, you're doing it wrong. And, like, there is definitely space to enjoy coffee with cream and sugar. I wish more people would, actually, that are professed to be coffee people, because if you're not enjoying it, then, like, it kind of doesn't matter, because that means you're not buying it.
Right.
And if you're not buying it, then these people that grow it aren't selling it. So at the end of the day, like, how you enjoy your coffee is totally valid, no matter how it is, even if it's mixed with spirits.
All right.
Foreshadowing. Anyway, so natural sun-dried coffee, what that means is that is sort of the oldest way that coffee has been processed, and it's kind of the most straightforward way of going about it, because what happens is that the fruit is picked off of the plant, and it's literally kind of laid out and spread out and allowed to dry in the sun. And kind of the functional issue with, like, coffee is that the part that we want to roast is the seed that's inside the fruit. Coffee is almost very similar to, like, a cherry. There's, like, a pit or, like, a seed on the inside, and that's the part we want. But it's kind of tricky to kind of get all the fruit stuff to separate from the fruit. So the most straightforward way of going about it was to literally just take that fruit, let it dry in the sun, and then once it kind of dehydrated to a certain point, you could then kind of just hull away that dried fruit and have basically the part that you want left over. And that has been done in Ethiopia for literally hundreds of years now. And we didn't even start washing coffee, which is sort of how this coffee was processed, and most of these are processed, until like the mid-1800s. So until like the mid-1800s, all coffee that you would have consumed would have been naturally processed. And what that does, if you just kind of want to go ahead and give yourself a little taste, is natural processing of coffee makes a very heavy-handed imprint on how the coffee tastes. And commonly what we get from naturally processed coffees is a very distinct, like, red fruit. A lot of people will describe it as like blueberry, strawberry, blackberry, a very intense kind of red fruit vibe on the coffee, or jammy, you might hear that as well, or like cooked berries, anything like that, because what you're literally tasting is the fact that that fruit was drying onto the coffee itself, or the coffee seed itself, or the bean as we typically would call it. So a lot of people like this because sometimes if you haven't tasted a lot of coffee before, this is where a lot of people have their first like light bulb moments with coffee, because the flavor will be so distinct.
It's pronounced.
That they might not have ever been like, oh, I didn't think coffee would taste like this, ever. So a lot of people have their first light bulb moments. Some people are a little like, it's a little much for me. Whereas with like counter to that, with washed coffees, you're tasting more of like how that coffee was grown, where it came from, et cetera, et cetera. You're not tasting as much of a heavy-handed imprint on the process. And most of the coffees, just because of like efficiency's sake in agriculture, most coffees you would drink are going to be washed, just because it's easier to get them to market. But places like Ethiopia and some other places they still have like a long-standing tradition in producing coffee naturally. You'll still see coffees from there, and we still buy them because we really like them, and we like for people to have those sort of like light bulb moments with them, for sure.
And you're paying for the quality of it. You're paying for the fact that you're laying it out, naturally processing it. You know, all of that goes into why the price is what it is. So think about that when you're comparing it to a wash product.
Yeah. And it's actually really challenging to produce coffee naturally well, because think about, like, you're letting just fruit sit out in the sun. Like, you would think like, oh, well, that's just going to be like rotten fruit, right? So there's a lot of like attention and like that has to be paid to the coffee to actually make sure it doesn't reach that stage. So when coffee is really clean and fruit forward and nice like this, that means that like a lot of labor went into like actually making it like done well and not pushing to the point of being like funky or fermenty or like, which you can easily get in a lot of natural coffees. So
That's what's up.
yeah. Cool. So this next one is a coffee from Guatemala. And this one's on the table to kind of represent sort of like a shift, maybe from like a historical perspective. So we talked about coffee being only indigenous to Ethiopia. And so like if humans hadn't had their imprint on coffee as like an agricultural product, like coffee would only be there. It's only indigenous to sort of that sort of like land area. So the reason that coffee even found its way to the Western Hemisphere is that coffee had to get moved there. We can actually shift these down. Coffee had to get taken there. And it got taken there to the Western Hemisphere specifically by the wonderful topic that affected a lot of things called colonialism.
Slavery.
And yeah, how a lot of different things sort of made their way around the world. But yeah, so basically the different European colonial powers were all really trying to get into the coffee game, and the Dutch were kind of like the first to get in the game, and they planted coffee in a place called Java, which sounds familiar as a coffee buzzword, right? But then everyone else kind of started to get in the game, and the Dutch actually gifted one singular coffee plant to the King of France at the time. I can't remember who was king at the moment specifically, but one plant. And the story is that this one plant kind of became like the genetic parent to like pretty much everything that wound up in the Western Hemisphere. So coffee kind of first sort of made its way over to Martinique, I believe. But then once coffee made it to the Western Hemisphere, it just got spread around like crazy. And a lot of times we associate coffee with places in the Western Hemisphere, right?
For
like
sure.
Brazil, Colombia, like
Guatemala.
Jamaica, Guatemala. And so a lot of your coffee and volume is produced in these places, but it had to get taken there or else it would have never been there. Coffee would never be in Guatemala if we didn't take it there. So
One more time for the folks in the back.
yeah. So coffees from Central America particularly are in season at this time of the year. They're kind of like a summer into fall sort of thing for us, which is why it's here. And a very big broad stroke note on coffees from Central America is they're going to be considered to be more mild, more sort of like balanced, a little bit more reserved than some of the notes you would have gotten maybe from the coffees from Ethiopia or some of the other stuff we have on the table. But with that said, they end up being people pleasers because they're very balanced. There's no like one note that's dominating everything else. A lot of what people tend to get in coffees from Guatemala is a lot of like sort of soft red fruit notes. We talk a lot in the coffee world, especially like our world, and like acids. So a lot of like malic acid, which is what you find in apples a lot. So a lot of people talk about like apples or like cherry or something like that. Soft like stone fruit flavors in coffees from Guatemala, as well as like kind of more like nutty flavors. So maybe like almond or pecan or things like that. But nothing's really like dominating each other.
This is definitely more mild than the previous.
Also washed coffee, so again, like you're tasting just kind of how the coffee was grown, where it came from, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
And nutty too.
Yeah.
Not nutty in like a peanut nutty type of way.
Yeah.
But in a like a more earthier nut, like maybe like a walnut type of vibe.
Yeah, for sure. And it's good to like, we hear nutty as like a flavor descriptor a lot in coffee in a very broad stroke, but like if you one really easy exercise, even like tasting things critically, it's like if you say nutty, it's like, okay, well, what kind of nut are you talking about? Are you talking about one that's kind of fattier, like an almond or a macadamia or something like that? Or are you talking about something that has like a really like dry tannic skin, like a black walnut or something like that that has maybe more of like a bitter kind of thing going on? Or it can even be peanut nutty. Sometimes peanutty is not a good quality to have in coffee, especially if you're just tasting like kind of like a dry roasted peanut flavor. It's not considered to be super desirable in a coffee, but like more like desserty type nutty flavors like your almond and stuff like that are good, considered good.
That is good. It's definitely approachable.
Yeah, for sure. And then this one specifically is one single variety called Java variety, and that is actually an heirloom variety that this particular place and is growing specifically on their farm. And I actually horribly misspoke because this coffee is not, oh, I'm talking about the wrong one. I'm moving on to the next one. Yeah, sorry. The one that we just tasted in Guatemala. But as a very harsh segue, this one from Nicaragua is a specific variety called Java from a farm called Finca Aurora. So one main distinction between, if our first distinction was between process, right? We had two processes from a similar place of the world. This would be basically considered like a coffee that is growing a few different varieties of the plant. So think of, again, going back to apples, maybe they're growing Fuji, Jazz, Red Delicious apples, and then this one is only growing one type of apple or one type of variety of the coffee plant, which, to be honest, like you don't see that too much in the coffee world. We talk about that a lot in wine, right? Like wine is heavily bought and sold based off of variety, right?
Absolutely.
Not so much in coffee, because for the most of the time it's not really practical for most farmers to really like hedge their bet on one variety, because if something happened to that one singular variety of the plant, like it could kind of ruin them financially. So most coffee places like that we're sourcing from, they're going to be growing kind of a multitude of a few different things to kind of just like diversify as sort of more of a defensive measure against like issues that a particular plant might have. But this particular producer does a lot of like sort of like experimental like coffee nursery work. So they have this singular variety, which is lower in volume from like how much maybe they produced of it, but it's kind of more of like a, all right, let's taste like what this one variety tastes like in our soil to kind of see what's up.
I haven't tried this one yet. This is so good.
Yeah.
For sure.
And again, yeah. So obviously two different countries in Central America, but kind of two different things going on.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's so interesting because I keep thinking about it in like a spirits wine type of way. So I'm just putting this in the context of single type of like variety and mixed variety is very different. So when you think about it, a lot of the wines we drink are blended because they want to keep one particular flavor profile, especially when we talk about whiskeys. They want every bottle of whiskey to taste the same, so they're blending and mixing to get one flavor. But with the coffees, it really is, there's room, there's space.
Yeah. And even words like blending or single origin can get really tricky in our world, because single origin, it's like, all right, what does that mean to you? Does that mean one country? Because you could get just like a huge lot of coffee from a place called Ethiopian grade 2 something, and that could literally be from like who knows where, who grew it. So a lot of issues in coffee can be just simple like things of like transparency, of just like knowing like what the actual story is of this coffee and like who actually like put their hands on it. Like a coffee like this has a name called Adanisa, because that is actually the name of the cooperative of multiple farmers that obviously contribute to this one sort of lot of coffee. And so it gets really tricky when you're talking about single origin or blends, because like this is probably going to be a blend of multiple people's efforts.
Yeah.
Whereas this is more from like one singular farm or like one singular maybe like producer, and it can even drill down to like a coffee down here has one person's name on it, and it's like this person's name is on this coffee because that's who grew it. And so it can get, it gets really like murky very quickly when it talks about coffee and blending and single origin and what's what. So
How many different flavor profiles does coffee have?
Great question.
There are literally like hundreds of different, what we would consider like either aromatic or like flavor compounds that can be had. And you can kind of see behind me, coffee has this sort of its own version of like a taster's wheel, where it's like you can kind of taste a coffee and sort of go around and kind of see like what sort of different things in different categories. Like all these things we kind of say like exist in well done coffee. Obviously you're not going to see a ton of like negative flavors on here per se. But you have certain things in different categories, like whereas like fruit obviously operates in a big space, which a lot of people don't associate fruit with coffee.
Right.
They might associate it more with like nutty or chocolatey flavors, which we do have hanging out here too. But like we get in really well done coffee a lot of fruit forward stuff, because that's a sign that the coffee was really well grown, was grown at elevation, was grown at a place where you've got, of course we're talking tropical climate, so it's hot during the day, cool at night, because we're up in the mountains, and a lot of that stuff creates like more complex sugars, more complex acids, which lends itself to getting more complex like fruit forward type flavors when we harvest and roast that coffee. But we have sort of like a little bit of everything on here, so we use this as a tool a lot for when we're teaching people how to like taste coffee and like think about it critically, in order to kind of like drill down further into like what they're actually tasting. And it looks pretty scary, but I actually will tell people, it's like, hey, if you only ever talked about coffee in this sort of center section in like kind of more broad strokes, like fruit, savory, spicy, floral, like you're doing it right. But then like maybe eventually you can kind of, again, kind of what we were talking about, like the nutty stuff, get maybe more like specific with like, what kind of nutty am I tasting here, you know, and or what kind of citrus am I tasting? Because there's a big difference between lime and blood orange, right? So, what was your?
Do you think it's more nuanced than wine? Because it's just more, it's in more different locations and more people. It's less rules in coffee as wine.
It's tricky, yeah. There's less rules, and I would say it can be as nuanced, but it's a little bit. It can sometimes be a little bit more crude, just because of, you know, like tasting coffee, like or tasting wine. Sometimes you're like, all right, it's this variety from like this particular place,
Right.
like especially when you see like the Psalms like doing their thing. Whereas coffee isn't so much like that, I guess.
Okay.
Sometimes maybe just because of like sheer repeatability, you know what I mean? But again, there's a lot of downstream factors with coffee too. Like I could take this coffee from Nicaragua that we were just tasting, and if I just roast it in a coffee roaster ever so slightly differently, it's going to taste completely different.
Right.
So there's a lot of that stuff too, where it kind of makes it hard to capture, like when you're tasting a coffee, like what's happening. It's really hard to just like blindly taste coffee and be like, that's from this place.
Right.
Like you can sometimes get there if you've done it enough, but it gets tricky sometimes, just because our, you know, even if it's simple stuff is like it was brewed poorly or like at the wrong grind setting, it's going to taste different and it's probably going to taste bad. So there's a lot of like opportunities for coffee to taste bad, to be honest. Whereas like when you got a bottle of wine that's sealed and assuming it's not like corked or anything like that, like you got what you got, and it's probably going to taste mostly like the bottle next to it.
Yeah.
Right.
Whereas coffee's, there's a lot more variance.
Last question with that.
Yeah.
Do people taste coffee to see if it's bad?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So we're doing this as sort of like an educational tool, but like this is done as like a quality control tool. So
Okay.
there's multiple applications for cupping. If you were standing on someone's farm to like taste like different sort of like pickings or like lots of their coffee, this is typically done could be done in a space like in a cupping lab or like some sort of coffee space in Guatemala, like at the producer, to be like, I want to buy this one, you know, because it's an agricultural product and like there's going to be variations in different like qualities and grades and things like that. And so tasting coffee in this way is sort of the way that it's done.
Okay.
Oh yeah, it's done all along the supply chain. So, but yeah, like the people that buy our coffee, like this is how they're going to be evaluating it for sure.
Nice.
To choose like what to buy to roast.
That's cool.
Yeah.
And also to remind you guys, he showed us this flavor wheel. There's not actually any like strawberry or lime or lemon or there's
Right.
like bergamot, carrot. It's not in the coffee.
Right.
It's the chemistry of it all gives you the notes and the feel of a carrot, of a mushroom.
Yeah.
Just like we talk about in our wines and our whiskeys, when we say it, we get different herbs. It's not actually present. It's just the chemical balance of it all makes you think of those flavors. Exactly.
So 2 different fun coffees really to end. Well, this one right here on the left. This is a coffee from Kenya. What's interesting about like coffees from East Africa and specifically Kenya is like coffee kind of like left Ethiopia, right, and went to the Middle East, and then like eventually started making its way to the Western Hemisphere, and then it kind of went on this weird like around the world trip and kind of like made its way back to like East Africa, specifically places like Kenya, Rwanda, Burundi, the DRC, like et cetera, and there's some very specific like interesting varieties of coffee that are grown in Kenya, kind of that are sort of developed to kind of deal with Kenya's specific like kind of microclimate. And so out of coffees from Kenya, we end up, what we commonly get are just really crazy, bold flavors. Coffees from Kenya considered to be very like high acid, but then also, and so like super fruity, a lot of citrus and tropical fruits, but also kind of would have like a savory tone. So sometimes people will describe coffee from Kenya as maybe having like almost like a tomatoey or like a spaghetti sauce kind of vibe. And so like they end up having this like crazy like depth to them where there will be like a lot of stuff going on at once. Currant is actually a note that you find a lot in Kenyan coffees, which I kind of am getting off of this. I'm getting a lot of like purple fruit, kind of tannicky, like either like blackberry, currant, like currant's kind of like more like a pungent raisin kind of deal. So a lot of that stuff is usually hanging out in coffees like this. Actually, I didn't even look at this box, and I said blackberry, and it's on the box. So there we go. It's almost like I do this.
Yes. What's so interesting about that with the vegetal flavor, it reminds me of a certain type of rum, a style of rum. I wonder how that would pair together as far as a cocktail.
You think agricole?
Yeah, the agricole rum, for sure. If I'm getting that tomatoey, vegetal.
Savory.
Yeah.
And here's why you say that. I often describe coffees as rum things, as a rum enthusiast, personally, when I do at nighttime. Because when you smell and like when you taste things, you're triggering your olfactory bulb, right? And that is attached to the part of your brain that's also registering like memories, feelings, emotions. So when we smell and taste things, they remind you of something that you're familiar with really commonly. And so like it's not weird to be like, oh man, this has this like grassy kind of like agricole thing going on. It's because you know that thing, you interact with that thing. And one thing we like to tell people, especially when they're tasting coffee critically, it's like don't like taste a thing and be like, oh yeah, I think that's like jackfruit, when like you haven't had a jackfruit like Jack knows when, right? So like a lot of that stuff too is like it's not, we have a lot of crazy terms on like the flavor wheel and things that you could describe the coffee as, but it's like you're gonna sort of attach the multitude of flavor compounds that are going on in coffee with things that are more familiar. And that's very appropriate to do. I definitely get like some like funky, rummy stuff going on in that coffee.
It makes you want to experiment. Like we tasted a lot of funky honeys. That probably would be interesting in that, and even like just the funky rums, just making a whole situation, a whole mouth party.
So this last coffee is very unique and not one you would see very often. This is from a single farmer, produced in Yemen, which is a place that's basically, again, we were talking about Yemen kind of being one of the first places that coffee moved to when it was first kind of starting to be grown as an agricultural product. But Yemen's basically trying to like sort of reclaim its sort of like place as far as being known as like a coffee producer, having to deal with multiple challenges, one being like in a place where like war is happening and like conflict. So being able to grow coffee in those spaces gets really challenging, but the past few years or so, Yemen's been trying to like get back going. And this coffee is produced by one person, so we get extremely low quantities of it. And then this particular one is naturally processed. And that's pretty common to do in Yemen, just sheer to the water availability. When you don't have a lot of water, because it takes a lot of water to like wash coffee to process it, and so if you don't have access to that kind of resource, like you kind of have to process it naturally just out of necessity. And so a lot of times in coffees that come from Yemen will be naturally processed, but just because of the microclimate, because of how the coffee's processed, like coffees just don't taste anywhere like this from anywhere else. And it's a very unique flavor profile that you're not going to taste very often just because of you're not going to have availability to this kind of coffee on a daily basis, just like walking in a coffee shop. So again,
Definitely get the fruit.
Yeah, sweet.
there's the red fruit things, but very different than how they were in our other naturally processed coffee. Almost in a little more, like, this has like a, I hate to say it, but like this has like almost like a bubblegum kind of thing going on. Like almost like a candy confection.
Candy, yeah.
Like it almost doesn't
Yeah.
taste like it's real.
It really is.
Yeah. That's good.
Yeah, like a floral thing going on. Very aromatic, like just very like, just doesn't taste like anything else. So I wanted to include this one as sort of like an end.
And what's the price on that one?
He's like, whoa.
Yeah, it's basically what we're doing. This coffee is like a very limited release. So I think they're literally only roasting this coffee like a few different times to like people that basically order it directly through the website. I don't know the specific number off the top of my head, but coffees that are sort of like this unique are not uncommon for them to be, you know, easily $50 a pound or more.
So for your coffee connoisseurs out there, you need something funky in your collection, you know, a little elevated coffee, look into this one. How do you say the name?
Hassan Asolo.
There we go.
I hope I didn't butcher that, but that was my best guess.
Out of Yemen.
Yeah.
I'm going back in for another taste of that. That one is super unique.
So how did you guys decide what coffees you wanted to have in your actual training? Education?
Yeah, a lot of what we do is we, as a entity that buys green coffee and roasts it, is we're usually trying to work with the same people year after year. We're kind of big believers in having direct relationships. You may have heard the term thrown around a lot, maybe like in the early to mid 2000s, or not even in the mid 2000s, but like maybe 5 to 10 years ago, like direct trade or even like fair trade.
Yeah.
Fair trade in a lot of things, and coffee as well, exists as sort of like a minimum wage, whereas like it's kind of like a defensive measure from keeping like a coffee producer from being like just completely taken advantage of, and that's kind of why fair trade was established in coffee. But fair trade doesn't always necessarily still cover the cost of production for a lot of farmers too. So a lot of what happened after sort of fair trade became a thing in coffee is you started seeing more coffee roasters and entities start just directly working with producers and co-ops and different entities to like have more direct relationships where essentially you can be like, hey, I've tasted this coffee, it is of this value, and it tastes really, really good. I'm going to pay you this much above and beyond what is considered like the commodity grade price for this coffee. And we usually, and some coffee roasters might kind of pick and choose what they want year after year, but we tend to try to like, when we want to basically be able to buy from the same people year after year after year after year. So all of these coffees that we've tasted, like I've seen these before, probably like 3 or 4 times now. They come into season, we put them in the bag or the box, we sell them, we sell out of them. They don't come back until next year, because again, coffee is a perennial. It flowers and fruits one time a year, so we get it one time. Like coffee, you shouldn't be drinking coffees from Guatemala in like February. Like they're just not in season. Like so, like I mean that's the thing we don't really talk about in coffee much as well. Like you just think it's like, oh, I just drink it and it's just always there, which it is. But like different parts of the world are harvesting and exporting in different times.
Who's harvesting in February?
Well, we're kind of a little bit on a delay. So like coffees that we commonly, basically like stuff that we're tasting right now was probably being like prepped and like shipped out like a season ago. So like in our winter time, like places in Central America, like your Nicaraguas, your Mexico, Guatemala and stuff like that, they would have been like working on harvesting and processing and starting to ship. And that's one of the challenges of coffee too, is it just functionally moves slow because it has to get loaded onto a container ship and shipped and go out over the ocean and get received and do all this like transit. So then usually that takes, can take anywhere from like 3 to 6 months, just depending on where it's coming from. So, but yeah.
Such a good note, you guys. We're gonna have to do an even beginner course of coffee before you even get to it being in your glass, because there's so much that goes into it. I didn't know that it floured. I didn't know it was only once a year. So there's so much more to appreciate when it comes to this liquid in your glass than just mixing it with sugar and cream or whiskey, depending on, kind of day you're having.
Yeah, coffee's, there's like a statistic that we kind of talk about a lot, is that usually at least like 30 different hands will touch like a single seed of coffee, from like it being on the plant, in the soil, on the side of the mountain in Ethiopia, to where like it gets to you. So there's a lot of like stages that coffee goes through from like there to here. And most of it's done by hand, especially when we're talking about the picking of coffee and the labor that goes into coffee, because you have coffee that's sitting on the shrub that's all ripening, right? But it all doesn't ripen at the same time. So for coffee to be done well, like you have to have people going out to those plants, picking when it's ripe, processing when it's at its best, and doing that multiple times throughout a harvest season. So it takes a hell of a lot of work. So when you get products like this that do taste really, really well and have really distinct, clean, sweet flavors, that's basically mean that like the coffee made it, because they can get messed up so many places along the way, for sure. Yeah.
Well, you guys, reach out to Dustin here at Counterculture Coffee if you're looking to get some premium coffees at your bar or restaurant that you're working at. And you guys do consumer sales as well?
Yeah. So you can get coffee directly on our website. That's usually the best place to go to make sure it's at its freshest. We also, sell in multiple places, like your local cafe or restaurant that's carrying our coffee, or we're in a few different like national grocery chains, like your Whole Foods, Target. We're in a few different Targets and things like that. Harris Teeters, like specialty grocery stores and things as well. So you can find us if you look hard enough, but usually if you want something like roasted, basically when you order coffee from our website, it's going to get roasted the very next day and shipped straight to your door. So that's kind of the way to get it at its
made to order.
freshest. Yeah.
That's amazing. And they are incredibly responsive. I reached out to them via the website, counterculturecoffee.com, and they responded to me in 24 hours. So whatever your coffee needs are, there is somebody to be very responsive on the back end on that website. So reach out to them for your coffee needs. And speaking of coffee, I love coffee with a pastry, croissants. But sometimes, especially when I'm drinking coffee without any sugar or cream, I like a really sweet treat. And we got these Chewies, a Charleston staple from Daddy's Girls Bakery, to go along with our coffee tasting this morning. They're a local bakery, family owned, Daddy's Girls Bakery on Reynolds Avenue. So just if we could do like a little bite and taste with the Chewies. Have you had Chewy before?
Don't threaten me with a good time.
Ooh,
Yeah.
We gotta get you into these Chewies, Dustin. These are like really a treat.
Okay. What are they made from? Just like a baked?
Yeah, it's like a blondie, but not, but
okay.
better.
Yeah.
Very buttery.
I can see that.
Powdery.
Yeah.
So yeah, you just need to get in. If you don't get sugar on you, then you're not really getting into it. Isn't it good? Do you think this would be good with coffee in the morning? It's a sugar bomb, but it's good.
Mm-hmm.
Texture-wise, it's creamy.
This needs like espresso or something to counterbalance.
Ooh, espresso would be good. And as if he didn't know,
Cappuccino, perhaps.
that we have a double espresso liqueur coming out. Because it wouldn't be right not to show you guys how to use these flavors in a cocktail, okay? We are the Cocktail Bandits. This is USBG Bartenders Guild. So here is a recipe that we have curated using a treat that we've curated. Dustin, don't go too far away. I'm gonna need you to taste this for me.
I gotta be the guy that cleans. You know what I mean? Damn. I was that barista.
Wonderful. Here's 2 of the small cups too. Yeah. So Van Gogh makes this amazing product called Double Espresso Vodka. and it has a wonderful flavor profile. It gives you the nuts, it gives you the caffeinated flavor, and it gives you a whole lot of sweet. So we're gonna taste that on its own first, so we can see from a real coffee maker if it's capturing the real espresso flavor that we would expect in a cup of espresso. Okay, that's fine, we'll work with these. No worries. It's definitely, you know, the color looks right.
Yeah, sure.
How's the smell?
I just smell alcohol.
Okay.
That's why I'm so desensitized to coffee these days. I'm just like, it smells like something else.
It's a little nutty.
Yeah.
Just give it a sip, and you want to, breathe out so you can release all that goodness.
Mm-hmm.
You know it. You know it, guys. What do you think?
It's good.
It's not crazy
No.
syrupy. It's very thin. It's very loose on the palate, but you're definitely getting that caffeine flavor. You're getting that coffee note.
Yeah. Could you apply this to like espresso martini kind of deal, or?
You can. That is one of their signature cocktails. They do an espresso martini with this.
Okay.
They make it super creamy. They add like a cream liqueur to it. But what we're gonna add to it is a nut liqueur. Like we talked about earlier, one of those coffees in the beginning had a very walnut forward flavor. And Tanika and I got a chance to go to Italy a couple years ago with the Italian Trade Commission. And she actually went to the distillery sorry about that. So Nucello is made in Italy. It is a nut liqueur. And Tanika, how about you tell them about Nucello since we got you here?
Okay.
That you had that hands-on experience.
Hey y'all, take my mask off because I'm, being cautious. Yes, I actually went to Toski and it was amazing. They use a lot of fruits. They have like fresh wild strawberry liqueurs. They have blueberry liqueurs. They also make a lot of syrups, and they do a lot of commercial production. So they do a lot of syrups and sweeteners for restaurants and bars and grocery stores all around Italy. They have this Nucello, which is a walnut liqueur that they actually take and gather up the walnuts, and then they process it in these huge plants, and you taste it, and it just tastes great. It's super sweet because Italians love their sweet liqueurs, but you definitely get the nutty flavor. And Toski, they just are great at their liqueurs. They make, I think, maybe 30 different liqueurs.
Wow.
Yeah, they're a really huge
cool.
corporation.
Yeah.
They're a really big production. So I enjoyed it. They had a great cocktail with a tobacco. They have a tobacco cordial,
Oh.
which was super interesting too. So go check out Toski online. They have great products.
So we're gonna do a little taste. Thank you for that breakdown of Nucello, having that personal experience. She went to 5 different distilleries and I went to 5 different, so we got to share the experience together, and it was really cool. Shout out to ITA for that amazing trip. We're gonna try some of this Nucello. Definitely the color is there. It's definitely lighter in color than the double espresso. On the note is heavy nutty flavors, very floral.
Yeah. Almost has like a kettle corn thing going on.
Absolutely, like butterscotchy. Yes, and that carries over to the flavor. Buttery, kind of like a Werther's little hard candy that's been like liquefied, I guess.
Yeah.
This is very sweet. So we're gonna be very ginger with this when we're adding it to the cocktail. So this cocktail is called Espresso Yourself, okay? Because we have been living, on lockdown these last 18 or so months, and people need to be expressive, let their feelings out, and hopefully drinking this cocktail will encourage you to express yourself. So we're gonna start with 1 ounce of this double espresso vodka. All right. And then we're gonna follow that up with 1/2 ounce of this Nucello walnut liqueur. Like I said, we don't need very much of this guy. It's gonna go a long way. And then we're gonna add some of our homemade cinnamon brown sugar. And you can make this as a very simple a 1-to-1 comparison. So if you're gonna make this for guests, you can do 1 cup of the water and 1 cup of brown sugar. And then you're gonna sprinkle about a tablespoon of cinnamon, ground cinnamon that you have in those little packets in your cupboard. Shake it up, and then you have your homemade cinnamon brown sugar. And you can put that in the fridge and it'll last for you for up to 2 weeks. So you can have that ready to go whenever you have guests come over. We're only gonna use a 1/2 ounce of this as well because we already have that sweet Nucello doing some work as well. Now the last ingredient we're gonna add is unsweetened tea. We love making cocktails with tea over here at the Cocktail Bandits. It adds great tannic flavors that we talked about in the coffees earlier. It's gonna really get your mouth moving. And we use unsweetened tea so that we can add our sweeteners in with our liqueurs and with our syrups, right? That way you can control your sugar levels. You're not, using already overly sugared tea. So we're gonna use 2 ounces of the unsweetened tea. This is gonna lengthen our cocktail so you can really have a good sip of this as you read your morning paper and just get ready for your day. So we already had ice inside our shaker. Ice is very important. It's gonna help dilute and also chill off this cocktail. Secure the lid and we shake. You gotta shake too, Dustin. Hey, he's shaking his neck. Hey.
That's all I get. That's all you're gonna get from me.
He was shaking in spirit, y'all. So we got our glasses already laid out. I'm just gonna pour right on top, you guys. And we're just gonna garnish it with,
That's a really good color.
thank you, little cinnamon stick action. Express yourself.
Thank you.
Express-o yourself. Cheers. Not too shabby.
That's nice.
It's light. It's not overwhelmingly sweet.
It's not.
It is, you still get the sweet tea flavors going on inside there, but that Nucello is really playing a whole lot in binding and bringing everything together. And you can still enjoy this with your morning chewy as well. I sure am.
It'd be a great morning cocktail.
Thank
Do you
you.
try to make sure you're controlling sort of the strength of the tea that you're making? Do you kind of make it a little extra strong, that way you're getting sort of the tannin in there, or?
Great point. We do put more tea bags in there. We allow it to really get a good steep on it. We want the color, and we also want all of that herbal tea flavor in there. So yes, a good 24-hour steep on the tea is probably best. And I do a cold brew steep on my tea.
Yep.
That way it really draws out all of those flavors. And I guess it's another class too to talk about different ways to brew coffee. I mean, there's so many different ways. Pour over, French press, classic brew. I mean, it just goes on and on.
Yeah.
But I'm glad you enjoyed this cocktail.
Yeah, it's great.
I am going to hope you guys enjoyed this session and enjoy learning more about coffee. Got a little idea on a coffee cocktail rendition that you can make. Check out Daddy's Girls Bakery, you guys. They have an assortment of treats that go well with any morning espresso or coffee. And make sure to check out USBG's page. We have more events this week for Education Week. Yoga, amaros, rums, little community service. You don't have to be a member to participate, but we are encouraging membership. And if you sign up now, it'll be free for the rest of the year. So that's a great incentive. And hopefully I'll see you sometime this week at another event. Thanks, Dustin, and thank you, Counterculture Coffee. And Van Gogh Vodka, too. You guys are awesome. Oh, cheers, yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
There we go. Somewhere out there. Oh, it says finish at the bottom there. We're new to this live thing on Facebook, y'all. See